Sarah now to get us started.
Thanks a lot, Eva. Hi, everybody. Thank you for joining us today. So, the Curriculum and Assessment Review, which was published back in November, sets out bold recommendations for strengthening curriculum and assessment practice. And across my primary English team and with the schools that we work with, we've spent the last few months thinking about what the review's recommendations really mean for primary schools and specifically for primary schools English provision. So this session clarifies the key messages, it explores current alignment with the review, and it highlights the priorities that primary school leaders need to focus on in order to embed the review's recommendations in classrooms. Before we begin, I have put together a little workbook for you. You don't have to use it, you might want to use it, but Eva's just going to pop it in the chat for you now. And Eva will also email the workbook out to you after the session as well, in case you want to share it with your colleagues back in school. So thank you, Eva, for sharing the workbook. And now let's just start by setting out what we're going to focus on today, and importantly, what you'll leave with. Because we'll begin by grounding ourselves in the rationale behind the review's recommendations, not just what is changing, but why those changes are being proposed. And then from there, we'll move into the key areas of change for primary English, so you have a clear sense of what's coming later on down the line. But the most important part of today is what this actually means for you in practice as leaders. So we'll spend time unpicking both the immediate implications and the longer term shifts, so you can start to think about how this lands in your own context. And my aim is that you don't just leave this webinar with a theoretical overview. I want you to leave with something concrete, with an action plan, so that by the end of this session, you're in a position to be able to go back into your schools and into your trusts and make deliberate decisions about what to prioritise in response to the upcoming changes. So let's start with part one, exploring the rationale which underpins the changes to the primary English curriculum. And before we dig into this, I want to just get a quick sense of the room, or the Zoom in this case. And when I run this session face to face, I usually get everybody in the room to stand up and then sit down as the statements apply or don't apply. Obviously, we can't quite do that here on Zoom. So instead, I'm just going to ask you to raise your hands, join in, and then put your hand down if the statement I read applies to you. Okay, so here comes statement number one. Hopefully you've all got your hands up, and then put it down if this first statement applies to you. Statement one. All pupils come up from Key Stage 1 with the transcription skills that they need to write fluently. If this statement applies to you, you can pop your hand down. Statement number two. I am confident that all my pupils write at length accurately first time without the need for excessive redrafting. If that statement rings true for you, you can put your hand down. And the third statement, my pupils are good at applying all of their grammatical knowledge meaningfully in context. If this statement applies to you, you can put your hands down. So I'm not sure how many of you will still have hands up by this point, but what's interesting is that when I asked this at our annual conference to English leads and head teachers and trust leaders, we had a room full of people, and by the end, the majority were all still standing up. They all still had their hands up. And that's the point, really. Despite big advancements over the past decade, it's evident that the national curriculum could serve the needs of some of our pupils better. There's still a gap between what we want for our pupils and what the current curriculum is consistently delivering. And that's exactly the space that the Curriculum and Assessment Review is trying to address. That's the gap that we're trying to close. And so over the past 2 years, we have seen a flurry of government publications, reports, policies, announcements, all of them an attempt to serve the needs of all pupils better. And when we're navigating multiple reforms, it can be really hard to keep track of what matters. So here's a brief roundup of everything primary English related. So I've been through everything over the past couple of years, and I've tried to pull out all of the relevant primary English bits to give you a quick reform roundup. So here we go. 2 years ago, back in March, Ofsted published Telling the Story, the English Subject Education Report, which highlighted strengths and weaknesses in English curriculum design and made a really clear call for greater coherence, especially in how reading and writing and grammar all connect across a school. This was followed in October 2024 by Ofsted's Strong Foundation report, and this report was explicit. When early reading, language and writing foundations are insecure, everything later becomes so much harder. Gaps emerge early and they persist. They're really, really hard to close later on. Then in July 2025, the DFE's Writing Framework was published, which is a brilliant document which provided evidence-based guidance for teaching writing in primary schools. It emphasised fluency, transcription, composition and oral language development, and it shifted the focus away from abstract knowledge and towards using language purposefully and developing sentence fluency. And then in September 25 came the Libraries for Primaries announcement. The Libraries announcement reframed reading as entitlement for all, access for all children to vocabulary, to background knowledge, to reading for pleasure for every single child. And then in November 2025 came the new Ofsted Toolkit, which makes inclusion non-negotiable and places renewed emphasis on strong foundations, judging how well schools support all pupils, especially those with SEND and disadvantage. And then later in November came the Curriculum and Assessment Review, led by Dr. Becky Francis, and the review raised concerns about curriculum overload, overly theoretical grammar, and weak progression, signalling a move towards fluency, coherence, and application. And crucially, the government accepted almost all of the review's recommendations, confirming that this wasn't just a discussion document, this is a clear direction of travel. And then in January 26, the National Year of Reading launched, responding to the decline in reading for pleasure rates and reinforcing the importance of fluency, of building up those reading miles, of building that volume and building motivation rather than just focusing on decoding. And then also in January, there was an announcement that 200 million would be dedicated for a SEND training programme, reflecting the growing consensus that inclusion isn't an add-on, it's about adapting everyday teaching so that all pupils can access the same ambitious curriculum. And then a month later, in February, we had the long-awaited white paper, Every Child Achieving and Thriving. And this set out a long-term vision to create a more inclusive, broader and more responsive education system with a major focus on strengthening SEND provision and ensuring more pupils' needs are met within mainstream schools. For primary schools, this means a clear shift towards earlier identification of need and greater accountability for inclusive practice, an increased expectation that all pupils can access and succeed within a high quality evidence-informed curriculum. And based on all of this, over the past couple of years, we are expecting a brand new national curriculum and programme of study for English due to be published in spring 2027, with first teaching of this new national curriculum from September 2028. And we also know that new and updated Key Stage 2 assessments will follow, but we don't know exactly when. The government's response to the curriculum and assessment review said that they will sequence assessment changes alongside changes to the content of the English curriculum at Key Stage 2, meaning that the current assessment arrangements will continue for an interim period. So we're not sure when the new SATs will come into effect, but if it follows what happened during the last curriculum change cycle, it could mean that the current Year 3 pupils would be the first cohort to sit the new SATs papers. But my point with all of this reform roundup is that the curriculum and assessment review, which is our core focus for today, it's not a panacea. It's recommendations, and the upcoming new national curriculum, they're not the solution for everything. They're parts of many reforms, many publications, many announcements over the past couple of years, which are all trying to improve things for all pupils. So you can see that over the past couple of years, we have been hit by a lot of documents. And the danger, I think, is that when lots of things arrive all at once, they can start to feel like lots of different directions, or worse, lots of extra things to do. But when you step back and you look across all of them, they're not actually pulling schools in different directions at all. They're all saying the same thing. In fact, you could sum up the direction of travel in one word, and that word is basic. Now, I played around with lots of different acronyms to summarise all of these documents, and the word basic seemed to be the most fitting, because this isn't about adding more things on top of what we already do. It's about getting the basics right. So let me explain exactly what I mean by this. B is for building fluency, not racing through content and trying to cover everything at speed, but ensuring that pupils can read, write, and speak with increasing ease, automaticity, and confidence. A is for application, moving away from the arbitrary over-labeling and towards using knowledge meaningfully in context. S stands for strong foundations, ensuring that every single child gets the best start and not allowing gaps to emerge in the first place, particularly in early years and Key Stage 1, but with implications the whole way through primary schools. And then I is for inclusion, inclusion for all, not as an add-on, but built into curriculum design from the start. And C is for coherence, coherence across key stages, so that what pupils learn actually builds rather than resets as they move through each phase, from early years to Key Stage 1, Key Stage 1 to Key Stage 2, and Key Stage 2 from Key Stage to Key Stage 3, to support that transition from primary to secondary. And this is why, in my opinion, the curriculum and assessment review is so good because it gives us, as primary leaders, permission to focus on the basics. So, why focus on these five things? Why are they so important? Let's think about this within our own settings. So I'm going to give you a couple of minutes to reflect on these questions. And there's one question for each letter. So the first question is to do with building fluency. Thinking about your school and your setting, what's one practice in your school that actually does the opposite, that hinders fluency? Then thinking about application. Where might pupils know something but not be applying it, not be using it consistently all of the time? Then thinking about strong foundations. What do you wish is more secure in your pupils when they come into year three, when they reach key stage two? What are the gaps? What's missing? Then, in terms of inclusion, where is support within your school unintentionally lowering ambition? And then, in terms of coherence, where do you feel within your school or within your trust learning is currently resetting rather than building? So I'm just going to give you 2 to 3 minutes just as a silent solo. If you want to pop answers in the chat, you can, but no pressure to. I'll just give you a couple of minutes to reflect on those questions, and your reflection time starts now. Minutes to reflect. Thank you for the contribution in the chat. We really appreciate that. I have asked these questions to leaders in schools that we work with, and they have given us a few responses, which I'll also share. So in terms of B, building fluency, we often get answers such as rushing through content, moving to extended writing pieces before pupils are secure at a sentence level, expecting independence before accuracy is there, which then automatizes lots of errors as pupils repeat errors again and again so that then they become habitual. Sometimes we get answers like lots of test prep, particularly in upper key stage 2 and year 6, and lots of comprehension questions at the expense of actually developing reading fluency. So things like that are often barriers to building fluency within primary schools. And then in terms of application, in the past we've had answers that often pertain to kind of the classic knowing doing gap. So pupils can often explain a rule but don't apply it in their writing, or they're quite secure in isolated grammar lessons but it doesn't transfer to extended writing. They all know, they can all tell you You need to put a full stop at the end of a sentence, but you don't see it consistently in all of their work. And also, pupils often showing kind of strong performance in guided practice, but that drops off when writing independently. In terms of strong foundations, some English leads and head teachers have told me that they wish that pupils were more secure in handwriting and in spelling and sentence construction when they come up into Key Stage 2. And then pupils who still have gaps in phonics or early reading obviously struggle a lot in Key Stage 2. So some schools have said that they wish that that was secure for all pupils. And then pupils just not having developed automaticity, so that means that their working memory is overloaded when they're trying to write. And then in terms of inclusion, answers that we've had previously, which may resonate you, in terms of like support that unintentionally lowers ambition, are things like over scaffolding or simplifying tasks rather than enabling access for everyone. Sometimes pupils who are having interventions in terms of their timetabling, being taken out of the classroom and missing kind of core reading lessons and key content and vocabulary that they then need for writing lessons, or pre-teaching that is happening to try and keep these pupils up to speed is not being tightly focused on the actual prerequisite knowledge that is needed. Sometimes we often hear kind of different expectations for different groups or different pupils rather than a shared goal of accessing the same curriculum. And then in terms of coherence, we often hear kind of breaks in the journey, particularly at key transition points. So from Key Stage 1 to Key Stage 2, Key Stage 2 to Key Stage 3, but also within schools year to year, where teachers aren't always clear on what's been taught before and what's coming next. So where grammar, reading and writing is kind of taught in year group silos rather than as a connected whole. So pupils experience inconsistency rather than a coherent build. So my aim here isn't to say that every school is doing all of these things, because they're not at all, but it's just to surface some of the common patterns and some of the common answers that I've received when I've spoken to head teachers and English leads and asked them these kinds of questions. And I think that often just naming these is the first step towards addressing them. Okay. So let's move on to the next section. So now that we've unpicked the rationale behind the changes and the basic direction of travel and the blockers that currently exist to stop those things from happening, let's focus now more specifically on the primary English changes. So the following areas that were highlighted for improvement in the curriculum and assessment review, they've just been copied directly from the curriculum and assessment review from pages 74 to 75. And I've copied them onto the slides, which I'll show you in a second. And I've also copied them directly into the workbook for you. So rather than me reading this to you, I'll just give you a couple of minutes to skim read this to yourself. Here's the next extract on the next slide, which I'll just give you another minute or so to read. come back together just to summarise these areas that were highlighted for improvement within the curriculum and assessment review. So the areas highlighted in terms of primary English include a dissonance between key stages, a high volume of overly theoretical grammatical content, and too much emphasis on textual features at the expense of developing compositional skills, as well as a lack of specificity in oracy and drama. So this is what the review highlighted needed to improve based on the call for evidence. And I wanted to just relate this back to schools. So how do these issues translate to the classroom? How do they play out? Well, when I've spoken to some of our teachers, this is what they have told me. And I wonder if these responses resonate with what your teachers experience in your schools. I'll just give you a moment to read these. Those are the problems. Let's now focus on the solutions and turn to the recommendations. So the Curriculum and Assessment Review made recommendations in terms of curriculum and recommendations in terms of assessment. So I'm going to run through the recommendations for the curriculum first of all, and then we'll look at the recommendations for assessment. All of these I'll pop on the slide, but they're also in the workbooks as well. And just to make the point that all of these recommendations that I'm about to share, they were all accepted by the government in their response. So all of these recommendations were made in the Curriculum and Assessment Review, and they were accepted by the government. So there are 4 key ones in terms of primary English curriculum. The first recommendation is to ensure clearer purpose with more clarity and specificity at each key stage, including clarifying this distinction between English and literacy, and in particular more clarity and specificity at key stage 3 to improve that coherence between the primary and secondary transition. The second recommendation was a review of grammatical content to determine what should be resequenced, what content should be removed entirely at Key Stage 2 to enable a greater focus on grammar in use rather than grammar in theory. The third recommendation was an oracy framework to support practice and to complement the existing frameworks for reading and for writing. And the fourth curriculum one was greater specificity for drama at Key Stage 1 and Key Stage 2, aiming to build solid foundations and support for that transition into Key Stage 3. So those are the 4 key recommendations in terms of curriculum. And now if we look at the recommendations in terms of assessment. So the first one was to replace the current grammar, punctuation and spelling test with an amended test which retains some elements but with new tasks to better assess composition and application. And then once that's established, they then want to consider whether this new test should be included in Key Stage 2 headline measures. The next recommendation was to develop an improved teacher assessment framework to provide teachers with clarity and include a greater focus on writing fluency. So the current TAFs, the current statements that we have for the TAFs at the end of Key Stage 2 to assess teacher writing, those are going to be updated and improved. The next recommendation was to review external moderation processes to strengthen peer moderation between schools with the aim of embedding good practice to improve moderation in years where schools are not selected for external moderation and improving consistency between external judgments. The next one was to find ways to encourage take-up of optional Key Stage 1 assessments. And then the last one in terms of assessment was to explore approaches for assessing progress for the small minority of pupils with certain SEND needs that make the phonics screening check inaccessible to them. So 9 recommendations in total, 4 in terms of curriculum changes and 5 in terms of assessment changes. Now, all of those 9 recommendations are listed 1 to 9 in your workbooks. And if we were together in person, I would get you to discuss this in groups and to kind of in true Aidan Chambers kind of book talk, tell me style, think about which of the recommendations you like, which you dislike, which puzzle you, and if any of them make you think of things that you've seen previously, if any of them remind you of anything or make you kind of make connections. As we're not in person and we're in a webinar, it's a bit tricky to discuss them in this way. So instead, I'm just going to give you a couple of minutes to just think about each of the recommendations and then see if you can just sort them yourself into the 4 boxes. So for example, if you like recommendation number 1, just write a number 1 in the likes box in your workbook. If you're puzzled by recommendation number 3, just pop a number 3 in the puzzled box. So I'll just give you a couple of minutes to do that. And then if you want to repeat this activity in your schools with your colleagues, it's a really great discussion activity. So I'll just give you a couple of minutes now to just jot down which ones you like, dislike, which ones puzzle you, and which ones remind you of something. Your time starts now. So when we've run this activity previously, a lot of the statements ended up in the puzzles box just because there are so many unknowns. We just don't know what will stay, what will go, what the new assessments will look like. And so the devil really is in the detail. So we don't yet know what might be removed from the grammar program of study, and we don't want to preempt or try and double guess the drafters. So everybody, although things, often sound pretty good, we just don't know what that will look like in reality yet. So when I've run this previously, a lot of the recommendations have ended up in the puzzles box because there are just so many unknowns. So I wonder if that was true for you as well. So let's move on to what this all actually means then. So we know the rationale, we know the direction of travel, we understand the recommendations and how things might change. But so what? What does this actually mean for schools, both in the immediate and the longer term? And it's important to say this first point really, really clearly. Primary schools are already doing a great deal really well. The Curriculum and Assessment Review repeatedly recognises the strength of primary practice, particularly things like the commitment to inclusion, the focus on early reading, and the professionalism of teachers and leaders, and how well we all know all of our pupils. So this isn't a reset and it's not a rebuke, it's a refinement. And crucially, there's a lot that we cannot and should not do yet. There is no new programme of study yet. There are no new statutory assessments yet. So this is not the moment to start rewriting curricula or making wholesale changes. This is a moment for careful thinking, not for ripping things up. And this is the idea of the Cobra effect. And I don't know if you're familiar with this, but basically during British rule in India, there was a problem with too many cobras in Delhi. So the government introduced a bounty and people were paid money for every dead cobra. And at first it really worked, but then people cleverly thought that, oh, the more cobras there are, the more money we can get. So they started breeding cobras to be able to kill them and get more rewards. But when the government realised this, they then scrapped the scheme and the breeders then simply released the now worthless snakes, and the cobra population ended up being higher than it was at the outset. And I think that's kind of a powerful example of what happens when we rush to fix something without fully understanding the system around it. And that's the risk in moments like this. And apologies if anybody who's German watches this, because I'm pretty sure I'm not pronouncing it correctly, so I'm really sorry. But this is what the Germans call the Schlimmbesserung, which means making something worse by trying to improve it. This is one of those moments. So the message here is not change everything. The message is protect what works, strengthen what matters, and prepare thoughtfully for what's coming next. Because the schools that navigate this well, they won't be the ones who move the fastest. They'll be the ones who think the most carefully. So let's go back to focusing on getting the basics right. In your workbook is a traffic light self-reflection questionnaire against the basics. And all of the prompts are designed to help you recognise what's currently working really well in your setting so you'll know what you need to protect, what's currently developing but a little inconsistent, so you'll know what you need to strengthen, and also what's limited, what's yet to be in place, what's not quite clear, so you know what you need to prepare for. So just as a silent solo, I'm going to give you a couple of minutes just to traffic light each statement, and your time starts now. And if you're watching the webinar recording of this, you can contact us using the email address at the end, and we can email you a copy of the workbook with all of the self-reflection questions. So just a couple of minutes to answer those questions now. now that you've completed the diagnostic, as a school or as a trust, you should be able to more easily identify at least one green area that you must protect, at least one amber area that you might like to refine, and perhaps a red area that you need to prepare for. This is a really great activity to do back in school with your teachers. Get them to each complete the questionnaire and then reflect as a team on the greens, on the ambers, on the reds, and see if there's alignment across your school team on what needs protecting, refining, and preparing for. If any of you are English Mastery schools and use the English Mastery programme, just to reassure you that English Mastery is already really strongly aligned with the direction of travel set out in the Curriculum and Assessment Review. So the things that the review is calling for, fluency, application, strong foundations, inclusion, coherence, these things are what our programme is built around. They're not new principles to us. And the green areas that we have are all outlined there in the table on the slide. And then once the new programme of study is published, we will be updating the English Mastery programme to make sure that it fully aligns with the new national curriculum. So let's move on to the final section. I want you to leave with something really concrete, with an action plan, so that by the end of today, you're in a position to go back into your schools and make deliberate decisions about what to prioritise in response to the review recommendations. So as you've reflected on the basics, what should be reassuring, hopefully, is just how much strength already exists in your schools. But reflection alone isn't enough. The real leadership challenge is deciding what to do with that insight. Action planning at this stage is not about wholesale reform, as we spoke about earlier. It's about making a small number of high leverage decisions grounded in your context, your pupils, and the direction of travel set out in the basics. So as we move
Sarah,
into...
just double checking your sound's working.
Ah, I can hear you perfectly, Eva. Can you not hear me very well?
Ah, I can now.
You can now. Oh, sorry. Shall I start this bit again? I'll go from the top of this slide. Hopefully you can all hear me okay. So I was just saying that reflection alone isn't enough. The real leadership challenge is deciding what to do with that insight. So action planning at this stage is not about making wholesale reform. It's about making a small number of high leverage decisions grounded in your context, in your pupils, and the direction of travel set out in basics. So as we move into action planning, I want to resist the urge for you to try and plan everything. Focus instead on one sensible action for tomorrow, one for this summer term, and one that helps you to be ready for next academic year. So the table in your workbook has some prompts and example actions. So use these to help you set your own actions and write them down in your workbook. So just a silent solo. I'll give you a couple of minutes, and if you'd like to, feel free to share your actions in the chat feed, but no pressure to. Your 2 minutes starts now. before we finish, I just want to leave you with a quote that's often used in education and policy circles because it captures the danger of rushed reform perfectly. The curriculum and assessment review isn't asking us to tear down fences. It's asking us to understand them, strengthen them, and rebuild thoughtfully where needed. In times of reform, strong leadership means protecting what works, refining with purpose, and preparing calmly for what comes next. So that's it from me, and I'll pass you back to Eva now. Thanks, Eva.
Thank you very much, Sarah. That was really informative. Does anyone have any questions at all in the chats? Just while I wrap up. So if anyone would like to hear more about English Mastery specifically, which is the program that Sarah has kind of very thoughtfully designed prior to kind of all of these changes being suggested, obviously evidence informed, so hopefully ahead of the curve, please do let me know. Happy to kind of discuss a little bit to see how it could work potentially in your context. And you can also click the link just there if you'd like to book in a call directly. I'll also be sending out an email tomorrow to all of you. I'll include the workbook just so that you've definitely got a copy. And I'll also include a recording of the webinar so that you can watch any sections back or share with colleagues if helpful. We've not had any questions come through just now, so I think we can probably wrap up there. And if anyone does have think of any questions afterwards, please do email partnerships@artcurriculumplus.org.uk. But yes, thanks again, Sarah. Lots of lovely thank yous in the chat for you and for hosting such a lovely session.
Thanks very much, everybody. It was great to see you all. Thank you, Eva.
Thank you.